Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Captain Knoll, would you support the FAA reauthorization bill that we've been discussing if the ATC privatization was not in it? Would ALPA support it without the ATC privatization?
I hadn't contemplated it, but
Well, contemplate it. Would you support it without it?
Yes, sir. We would, because it has many other factors that advance safety.
Thank you. Mr. Brahimi, the FAA bill, I'm sorry, the FAA budget proposes $197 million in cuts, including $27 million to the FAA's operations account, $69 million to the facility F&E, and $101 million to the FAA's research, engineering, development accounts. That's the proposal for 2019. What specifically would you do to ensure that these cuts, if enacted, would not adversely affect safety?
As you know, this is not the first time they are faced with these types of cuts. We typically reprioritize. We look at the sense of urgency. We look at the type of research that can only be done by government agencies, including the FAA. And we also try to rely on those types of research that are happening in industry and try to promote and advance those types of activities. And bottom line, we're going to have to reevaluate our work. We have to figure out where the priorities are and fund those activities that are critical to our safety mission.
And you would choose a safety mission first, then?
Safety mission and enabling activities. And in terms of enabling activities, fortunately, in a lot of areas, industry takes the lead, and we will make sure that we can work with them closely in those areas.
Mr. Hampton, based on that, what would you say? It is kind of tough to pick and choose. There's plenty of issues that we're dealing with on aviation safety, but what would be the biggest threat in the IG's view to aviation safety?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Larsen. We wonder back at the IG we talked to Mr. Scoville, what keeps the Inspector Generals, and I think right now the safety concerns with unmanned aerial systems right now, it's not when, but if there's a close collision with a commercial aircraft, and we just hope there's no passenger injuries or fatalities. That's our concern, followed closely by the close calls at airports right now.
Yeah, and in your recommendations with regards to UAS, could you reiterate those recommendations?
Sure. Most of our recommendations focus on helping FAA become more risk-based, where most of our recommendations focus on getting their information systems lined up, a single depository to focus on, getting their single points for tracking all their sightings. Another one was getting their systems in place. Another one is having better guidance to their inspector workforce information to help them position themselves. The UAS is probably one of the most difficult and cross-cutting things that's going to affect the agency. So those are two of the recommendations we think that they can move out and forth with and make some progress on.
Yeah. Thanks. Mr. Bahrami, do you think the FAA has that authority to move forward on those particular steps? Or do you think that you need a direction from Congress?
We are working on a number of initiatives. When we talk about UAS and the risk of UAS in aerospace, basically the issue is being able to validate and verify the sightings. This is a huge problem. And as we know that we started an ARC that looked at ID, remote ID. So until such time we are able to go forward with that, we're going to continue to have challenges identifying and enforcing the rules.
All right, that's fair. And Mr. Sultan, the role that NASA plays in developing a transportation management system with UAS, can you tell us where NASA is on timelines to get us to a point where we can start, if you will, seeing that in the sky?
Thank you for the question. So we have two different projects. One is focused on the larger class, higher altitude controlled airspace access, right, and one is on the low altitude, below 400 feet, small UAS. In regards to the UTM, which is the lower altitude one, we have a set of high fidelity field trials conducted almost on an annual basis, which will look at integration of these vehicles in a higher density operations. So we started off with just operating in rural areas. The next level was with some additional people and objects nearby. And the third one is operating at beyond visual line of sight with additional vehicle integrations, manned operations. And of course, the fourth one, which will be conducted in 2020, is mainly focused on dense urban operations or a simulated environment of that. The key is that this industry is still very much in infancy in terms of the data needed in order to certify these vehicles and generate the regulation. So what NASA's doing in both of their high altitude as well as the low altitude UAS projects is generating that data and delivering it to the FAA as well as the standards organizations such as RTCA, so that they can make informed decisions on what the regulations and certifications ought to be. In a nutshell, we don't know what we don't know. That's what it boils down to in regards to low altitude, to UAS operations, and that's what the gap that NASA is trying to fill.
Yeah, thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Larsen. Chair recognizes